Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of This Week in Privacy. This is episode 14 of our weekly series where we cover the latest updates with what we're working on within the Privacy Guides community and this week's top stories in the data privacy and cybersecurity space. I'm Jonah, and I'm joined again by our video producer, Jordan. If you don't know much about what we do, Privacy Guides is a nonprofit which researches and shares privacy-related information, and we facilitate communities on our forum and Matrix and other places where people can ask questions and get advice about staying private online and preserving their digital rights. So I'll give you a quick rundown of how this show works before we dive into it. We start out all of these shows by covering site updates, things we're working on behind the scenes really quick, and then we will move on to talking about the top stories in the news that we've seen this week, and kind of talking about what we think about those, some of the stories we're going to be talking about today, some changes at GitHub and Microsoft, and how that relates to their Microsoft's entry into AI, a lot of news about YouTube and how they're using AI to kind of scan what you're watching to find out things about you, some bad news about Wikipedia coming from the UK, and a high severity zero-day vulnerability in a pretty popular tool, WinRAR. So we'll talk about all that and more in this show, and then we'll move on to some trending topics on the forum, and we will answer any viewer questions you have. So if you have a question for us, we will either get to it during the stream or towards the end, but please leave a comment in the forum thread for this live stream. That's on our forum, and you can do that without a Google account. Otherwise, you can always leave a chat in the YouTube chat here, and we will read that as well. So kind of up to you whether you want to ask that, but we'll try to get to everyone. Um, and with that out of the way, let's kick off with what we've been working on. Jordan, why don't you start us out with what you've been working on the video side of things this week?
Yeah, thanks, Jonah. This week we've kind of seen a lot of debate and talk about like age verification laws, and there's definitely been quite a lot of stuff drumming up in the press about that sort of thing. So we kind of wanted to quickly pivot and put something out there just to make sure that people have a resource to, send to their friends and family, send to like understand the topic better. And we kind of pushed to get a video out this week, which we're hoping to publish right after the live stream. So definitely after you finish watching this, definitely look out for that. And it's an age verification video talking about like the perils of age verification laws, such as the one that we currently are seeing as probably the biggest and worst example, which is the one in the UK, which is the Online Safety Act, and also some of the laws in Australia because they have laws against people under the age of 16 accessing social media, which are very, very close to coming into effect. And basically, the video goes over why these laws won't protect children, why they're a disaster for your privacy, and what the solution actually is. And I will just say as well, this video was based on an article by who's one of the staff writers here at Privacy Guides, and she did an amazing job with that article. It was a really, really thorough um, debunking of age verification, and it really turned out to be quite an interesting switch to the video format as well. So even if you read that article, I think it's worth like watching the video too. And we're trying to like make sure that there's like a good video out on this topic. There's a lot of people like sort of speculating and stuff and not really talking about the privacy issues. So we thought we probably should just try and push to get this out this week, which is basically what we've been working on this week on the video side of things. And of course, there is the browser fingerprinting video, which is still in the works, but we felt like it was more important to like cover something that was super pressing for people. So that is why we kind of quickly aim to get that out.
Sweet. Thanks, Jordan. Yeah, that article from M is fantastic. I think it came out at least a few months ago, maybe January, if I remember correctly. So yeah, a bit ahead of the curve when it comes to all this age verification stuff. We've been tracking it for quite a long time, and then it's really popular now because of all of the laws finally coming into effect, unfortunately. So I'm excited to see that video from you this week because I think it'll cover a lot of that stuff and talk about some of the updates we've seen since that article came out in more detail. Um, but yeah, in terms of other stuff that's been going on behind the scenes, I know I've been saying the past few weeks we've had a lot of people on our team who have been out doing things in their personal lives and going to conferences and all sort of fun stuff. So finally, everyone is kind of back together and we're kind of getting in the swing of things. So it's been a bit slow, but we are starting to work on more articles again, which I can hopefully tell you more about next week. We're also talking about a lot of different ideas for our video strategy, especially like YouTube Shorts and how we can get that out. So we're still kind of brainstorming all of that, but you'll probably see some more when it comes to that stuff soon. Um, and beyond that, I've just been working on kind of boring technical stuff because Matrix came out with a big security update for all the rooms. So we've been trying to get that done behind the scenes so we can get that going because we run a lot of large public rooms and need to get that. I think that kind of wraps up most of the stuff our team's been working on. Why don't we move on to some of the biggest news in privacy and security from the past week?
That's a great idea. So I guess the first story and the sort of highlight story for this week is YouTube backlash begins. Why is AI combing through every single video I watch? Now, I guess just to throw a little bit of context on this, if you've been following every week, it seems like we're talking about age verification because it literally every week we're seeing even worse like things happening with the laws finally coming into effect. And I guess we talked about it a bit last week, but YouTube is now using AI to detect underage users, not in the UK, but in the US. So this is quite an interesting development because number one, there's no, as far as I know, like national like law requiring YouTube to actually detect underage users in the US. Whereas in the UK, there is a national law called the Online Safety Act. So basically, let's just do a quick quote from the article. YouTube's age verification system estimates users' ages by interpreting a variety of signals. YouTube's announcement said, including the types of videos a user is searching for, the categories of videos they have watched, or the longevity of the account. If a user is estimated to be under 18, YouTube restricts the account by disabling personalized ads, turning on digital wellbeing tools to prevent young users from being bombarded with harmful content, and other safeguards. To lift these restrictions, YouTube requires users to share either a government ID, a credit card, or a selfie to authenticate their actual ages.
And we're looking at an Ars Technica article here. I don't think you're showing it on the screen, Jordan. You're showing the YouTube chat if you wanted to pull that up for people to watch.
Okay, technical issues. Sorry about that, everybody. Thanks for letting me know, Jonah. Okay, so now it's on the screen. Um,
Right.
so yes, so what we're saying is that if YouTube can detect through like AI algorithms that it does on the videos and content that you're watching, it can actually require you to do an ID check. And there was linked in this article is a change.org petition, which rapidly neared its 50,000 signature goal because people feel like they're being surveilled and judged by an AI that is basically testing to see whether they're actually an adult. So I think this is kind of like an interesting thing about like age verification. It kind of means that like your activity on a website is going to be under more scrutiny because they have like a duty to require children to not be using their platform. So we're like already seeing this sort of proliferate, I guess. Um, and I guess the comments here from people is like, even without requesting ID, why is an AI combing through every single video I watch? as an adult, I should be able to watch what I want within the law. And if the viewer is a child, that responsibility belongs to the parents, not a corporation. So that's just a quote from someone. And
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. That's something that we've been saying for a while. It's kind of like this is something that we can't really be enforcing from a government or a corporation point of view. If you want to protect your children, like that should be a parent's top priority, and they should kind of have a handle on that. I know in this article, a big problem that a lot of people are having is that they uh, are being classified as children for whatever reason because of the types of content they watch. YouTube is first and foremost like it's an entertainment platform, and it's not surprising that there are a lot of people who only use it to watch maybe entertaining, maybe some would describe it as childish content. Not everyone is going on YouTube to learn things or watch insanely educational or professional videos, right? I mean, a lot of people don't use YouTube all that much and maybe just watch a couple videos on their break or whenever from a channel that they find fun. And that's fine, but it's going to get you classified if these I mean, it's going to get you classified in a different category than somebody who uses YouTube for like education stuff. And the fact that your only recourse is to then provide your ID and other sensitive personal information to Google, which is a massive security risk to provide to any website on the internet, and it's not recommended. It's not a good it's not a good situation at all. Um, would so it's very strange to me that this is kind of being introduced, in countries that don't have these age verification, laws at all, like you were saying. The UK, of course, does, but, the US in general and most states don't have anything related to age verification. As far as I know, the US states that do have some age-related laws right now that have recently been passed, they don't apply to YouTube at all, so it's completely unnecessary, and we're seeing this not just from YouTube, but from a lot of companies right now where they're kind of jumping on this age verification train for no reason just because everyone else is, and it creates a very risky environment. It's getting, I think, dangerous to use a lot of these internet services right now because you don't want to be a victim of identity theft or something like that if your data is eventually breached, and all of this data um, will more likely than not be breached at some point, which is why it's so dangerous to hand out to random sites on the internet. So yeah, it's a bad bad situation all around.
yeah, I think this is like just sort of what happens when we get sort of lots of countries introducing age verification laws. And there'll even be countries that don't actually require it, starting to require it. So this is kind of an unfortunate like side effect of like the proliferation of that, which is unfortunate, but we thought we should talk about it this week because that was sort of, we're kind of a light news week this week. So this was sort of like the big topic that
Yeah.
I thought would be the major
Age
thing.
verification, it's certainly like dominated a lot of our discussions lately, but it is a big problem, and I think that people need to be aware about it and they need to kind of fight back against it, which is why I'm excited for your video to come out. I think it's a good point what you were saying about like other countries introducing this. It's hard to say whether these companies like YouTube and Spotify are using this kind of as an excuse to get more data about you, or if they're just kind of catering to the lowest common denominator when it comes to these laws, because even if they don't apply outside the UK right now, um, if somebody in the UK uses a VPN or something and accesses these sites, are those sites liable? They're probably not, but I'm not a legal expert, and their legal team might disagree, and that might be why, or at the very least, that could be an excuse that they're using as to why they need to do this everywhere, which is another reason that it's so dangerous that some of these countries are introducing these laws, because a lot of the times you do see that because it is a law somewhere, it's easier for some companies to just apply that broadly, over broadly, even when it's not necessary. Um, yeah. think that kind of covers all I have to say about age verification, though. Do you have anything else to add before I move on quick?
No, I think you brought up a good point. Yeah, I think yeah, it's pretty much all we've got to say on that. I know we keep bringing it up every week, but it just happens to be the topics that are like trending, and it just keeps getting worse. So we have to cover it. But yeah, we won't harp
Yeah.
on it too much this week.
Let's talk about another story. This one's from The Verge. The headline is GitHub just got less independent at Microsoft after CEO resignation. I've seen a lot of people talking about this story because, of course, a lot of the privacy tools we recommend are um, open source, and many of them are hosted on GitHub. So this article says Microsoft is moving GitHub even more closely into its core AI team following the resignation of GitHub CEO Thomas Dom I don't know how to say his last name, Domeke? I'm butchering that, sorry. After nearly 4 years as CEO, he's leaving GitHub to become a startup founder again and pursue opportunities outside of Microsoft and GitHub. Again, I apologize, Thomas, for butchering your name. It is GitHub has operated as a separate company ever since Microsoft acquired it in 2018 for $7.5 billion. Microsoft isn't replacing the position, and the rest of GitHub's leadership team will now report more directly to Microsoft's core AI team. So yeah, that's a story that I've seen a lot of people talking about on social media and on our forum because I mean, AI is just a popular topic in general, I think, and it's really interesting to see that this is the direction that um, Microsoft is going in. I don't think when Microsoft acquired GitHub in 2018, AI wasn't really on a lot of people's radar quite yet. It was like just being introduced, and I don't think that people really saw like the value of these massive data sets of like code that GitHub has. And then uh, Microsoft may have known something before we did, or it just worked out for them. Either way, um, it's clearly being used as like a big training data set for all of the Copilot and OpenAI stuff that Microsoft is working on. And this is just clear evidence that that is the value that Microsoft sees in GitHub more than anything else. Um, and yeah, it's dangerous because n- I mean AI is still like not a solved problem, I think, in terms of copyright and liability and all that stuff. And for like new developers who are working on privacy related stuff, um, they might not uh necessarily want their code to be implemented into some of these non-privacy related software hosted on GitHub. And also, it's dangerous because GitHub kind of encourages the use of these AI tools, and that could lead to um, like poor quality code and other issues in existing projects. So yeah, the stuff that I've been seeing about this is largely related to people once again switching off of GitHub. We've seen a lot of that happening in the open source community since Microsoft acquired it. And I don't know if this is going to be what gets more of those projects to migrate to something like Codeberg or GitLab. But yeah, it's an interesting development from Microsoft. I don't know if it was completely expected, but it seems like they are really throwing everything behind AI behind the scenes. So it does make sense.
I guess like probably the biggest question here is because Privacy Guides is basically a project on GitHub. So, do you think this will affect the project?
Yeah, that is a great question. And we've talked about switching off of GitHub and using other platforms a lot behind the scenes and on our forum. I think there's a lot of public forum discussions about this. Um, we haven't really talked too much about this with like the volunteer team behind the scenes of like what we want to do about this. And I haven't really surprisingly, I haven't seen anyone bring it up in the latest topics about this on the forum, but it's definitely something that we should dive into. A big reason that we've been sticking with GitHub for so long is because we don't really rely on any of GitHub's services. We don't require people to use GitHub to suggest things on the site, for example. We have our forum for that, and we accept contributions from GitLab and Codeberg, so people who want to submit a change don't have to use GitHub at all. It's pretty much just used by us internally, which is why it hasn't been a huge priority to switch. Git is also, thankfully, a very decentralized and federated protocol itself already. So switching all of our code base from GitHub to another platform wouldn't be that challenging. Um, but yeah, there I know when we've talked about this in the past, there's been a lot of strong opinions on both sides about whether we should stick with GitHub or leave. I really wish there was a good, like, federated alternative to GitHub, in terms of, like, the social aspect and everything, because that is the primary thing that we use GitHub for. I think it's just for reach and kind of that social discovery aspect of it. In a similar way to how we use YouTube, for example. We host all of our uh, videos on PeerTube for people who don't want to interact with YouTube, but YouTube is a good platform for getting in front of new people. And in the same way, our current website, like, we don't use features like GitHub Pages for our hosting. We self-host all of that stuff. The forum's completely unrelated to GitHub, so it's really only GitHub behind the scenes for uh, the code and for people discovering us through that platform. And right now, if we switch to another platform that's centralized, we're just kind of kicking this issue down the road for a few years because I don't think any centralized platform is ultimately going to be great for, like, the long-term home for all of our stuff. And um it would just be nice to see more of a federated community come about. I know Forjo has been working on this for a very long time, where we can kind of self-host this and take more control of this on our ends while not losing the discoverability and social benefits that platforms like GitHub have. So I'm hoping for some better alternatives, but it doesn't sound like that'll happen very soon. In the meantime, I don't know what will happen. We'll probably have to discuss this with our team. And if anyone else has thoughts, I'd love to talk about this on the forum and figure out what we should do.
Yeah, I mean, it's also like kind of been a bit of a bumpy ride with like these alternatives to like GitHub. Like I remember Forjo used to be Git, which used to be something else. So it's like a fork of a fork of a fork at this point.
Yeah.
So I mean, yeah, it's tricky, especially when it's like a bunch of volunteers and you know, Microsoft is a massive corporation. They're always going to have the benefit of having extra resources. So I mean, yeah, it's not something that I've thought about too much either, as someone who's involved with some of this stuff on GitHub. But I think if people bring it up and it becomes more of a concern, then maybe we can discuss alternatives to that. But it's not looking like it's a huge priority for the community, and a lot of times it's, community members that guides the direction that we take on things. So if that becomes more of an issue for people, then I think we can definitely look into alternatives, or if there's like a way we can have GitHub federated across or something like that. But I don't think that GitHub being less independent is a positive, so this is not really great to hear, but it's worth
Yeah, I
discovering.
think it's been coming for some time, for sure. I mean, Microsoft has tried to incorporate more and more, like, Copilot features into GitHub and that sort of thing. So the writing's on the wall. We'll see how long it lasts. But the good thing about all of this Git stuff is that when GitHub becomes completely unusable, it will not be very challenging at all to switch off of it. So we kind of have the luxury of taking our time in that regard. People who are, like, heavily reliant on GitHub specific features like GitHub Actions or GitHub Pages should probably be taking a closer look at this and figuring out how to migrate sooner rather than later because um, you never know how this is going to work out, I think.
Yeah, and especially when it's like open source projects that are using this technology, and like you said, like GitHub Actions. I know like quite a few projects use that for like building packages and stuff. So yeah, it's probably definitely a concern for like other projects, but yeah, it doesn't seem like it's the biggest concern for us. Like you said, it's like we don't really need it that much because we have the forum and it's like connected to GitHub, GitLab, and Codeberg. But yeah, it's interesting. But I feel like we've kind of covered that fully now, and let's just quickly hop on to the next topic here, which is Wikipedia loses challenge against Online Safety Act verification rules. So Wikipedia has lost a legal challenge to a new Online Safety Act rule, which says it could threaten the human rights and safety of its volunteer editors. So this is a article from the BBC by Chris Valence, and the Wikimedia Foundation, the nonprofit which supports the online encyclopedia, wanted a judicial review of regulations which could mean Wikipedia has to verify the identity of its users. So if you're not currently aware, there is rules coming into effect that affect basically platforms that have a large user base. I think it's more than 10,000 users basically have to make sure that children are not accessing the platform. And basically, if Wikipedia doesn't win this challenge against the Online Safety Act, it could mean that you need to verify your ID to access the website, which is quite a concern because a lot of the content on Wikipedia is actually like, I know that there's like definitely a concern about the accuracy of Wikipedia sometimes, but there is a lot of good general information that covers a lot of topics. And I know it's somewhat like variable on like the quality of that content, but I think it's definitely quite a good resource for people to access, and having that restricted is definitely, I would say, censorship. Um, Let me just quote from the article one more time. In this case, the Wikimedia Foundation and a Wikipedia editor tried to challenge the way in which the government decided to make regulations covering which sites should be classed as Category 1 under the Online Safety Act. The strictest rules sites must follow. So basically, they want to challenge the government's classification of Wikipedia as a Category 1 service provider, which means that they have to verify the identity of its contributors, undermining their privacy and safety.
Yeah, so I think it's not quite there yet. So this is a different decision. So basically, what's happening here is the Online Safety Act allows Ofcom to classify what sites are Category 1, and the websites that they are allowed to classify as Category 1. It's a very broad definition, and that's the definition that's being challenged. So now that they've lost this, the UK government is basically saying Ofcom is allowed to classify Wikipedia as Category 1. It is their legal right to. That doesn't mean Ofcom has given them that classification yet, so we're still not at the point where age verification might be required on Wikipedia. But um, if they do decide at some point in the future that it's Category 1, Wikipedia would then have to do another challenge of that ruling, basically, and they still have that option available to them. So this loss only says that something could happen in the future, and then you have to challenge it specifically then. But they're not exempt from the definition that of websites that could potentially be classified Category 1. So it's we'll have to see, what direction the UK goes in. I would say it probably doesn't bode well for Wikipedia because I'm guessing Ofcom will indeed classify them as Category 1 eventually because they've fought to do so, and because this article does say that they considered when writing this law in the first place whether Wikipedia should be exempt from the regulations, and they didn't give it a flat out exemption like Wikipedia wanted. So it just leaves it in a gray area right now of things that could potentially happen within the scope of this law, unfortunately. It's just widely applied, and we could see this classification applied to pretty much any website. I mean, if Wikipedia can be classified this way, it's hard to imagine any other site is really going to not be classified or potentially classified in the same way, you know?
Yeah, thanks for the correction there. But I guess like the thing that like I've seen when I was researching the age verification video is a lot of like smaller websites are kind of afraid to actually they don't have the resources and they don't want to not comply with these laws. So actually just shutting down their entire website because they just can't comply. So
Yeah,
like in the instance of Wikipedia, they have like quite a lot of resources so they can actually do this sort of thing. They can challenge when they're like you said challenging uh classifying Wikipedia as a category 1 um service provider. They actually have the ability to do that. A lot of smaller websites don't have the ability to do that and they're scared to not comply because there's actually huge fines for not doing so. Um, but yeah, thanks for the clarification on exactly what's going on there. It's still not a great I like it's still not a great series of events, I guess. Because like you said, like it's quite a big platform. I feel like it was one of the most visited websites on the web. Like it's used by a lot of people to access information, and at least in this article they don't say that the actual website is going to be required to like they're not going to verify people just to access the website. It was contributors, I believe. So, um even just contributors though, I think that's still a bit of a worrying thing because people can be contributing stuff that is sensitive or like on pages that might put them at risk. And I think as long as the information is accurate, it doesn't really need to be verified against who exactly that person is or like having them verify their identity. So it's, yeah, a bit of a problem, even if it's
yeah,
just for the contributors.
it's a bad situation. To your point, I mean, I do think a lot of this is kind of the intent behind these age verification laws. We've been saying it, I think, for a while that these age verification laws, they really are a vehicle for governments to censor more of the internet and kind of restrict what websites can exist at all because exactly like you said, creating such a massive burden on a lot of small internet providers and websites will indeed lead to them just leaving the country entirely, which is probably, a secondary goal of what the UK wants. They want to be able to take down these sites with impunity, and people generally won't be able to fight back. And even if they do, or if they lose, they'll still have to implement onerous age verification systems in their sites that's going to prevent many people from accessing those sites anyways, even if they do comply with all these laws, which will ultimately just massively decrease the amount of information that's accessible to people in the UK from the rest of the world, which is very dangerous and concerning. We have never really seen this in um, other Western countries like the UK. This type of heavy restriction on what you can and can't do with your own computer online. Um, so yeah, very dangerous situation all around.
Yeah, and I think like you said, like we haven't seen this in any Western country. It's interesting you say that because like I think in a lot of cases people would be completely against this if it was like Russia is implementing age verification to access websites. Everyone would be just absolutely against that. They would be like, "Oh, that's like totalitarian. Oh my goodness, like that's terrible." But then suddenly, when it's in the UK, it's suddenly like, "Oh, this is like a legitimate thing." Um, we have to be at least consistent when we talk about this. Like, it doesn't matter which country is doing this. It doesn't matter which government is doing this. This is just a threat to people's privacy. It's like you said, it's censorship of websites. So like, um, yeah, it's not great, especially when it's such a big resource like Wikipedia.
Absolutely. Why don't we move on to our next story here? This is reported by Ars Technica. High severity WinRAR zero day exploited for weeks by two groups. Exploits allow for persistent backdooring when targets open booby-trapped archive. So this is definitely a story you should pay attention to if you use WinRAR, which definitely a lot of people do. The article says a high severity 0-day in the widely used WinRAR file compressor is under active exploitation by two Russian cybercrime groups. The attacks backdoor computers that open malicious archives attached to phishing messages, some of which are personalized. Um, so this is a rare example of a high severity vulnerability kind of being seen in the wild. It isn't too often that you get stories like this, and you know that you definitely need to upgrade right away. As I mean, arguably, should you be using WinRAR in the first place? I don't really know. I think there are better alternatives out there, so it might be worth uh, researching that a bit for your use case and switching to something else. But if you do use this, definitely something to keep an eye on. Um, I don't have too much more to say about this specific article. How it works is very interesting. I think there's a lot of like technical details in this article, but that kind of sums up the gist of it, I think.
Yeah, there's definitely not a huge amount to say here, but WinRAR, I don't know, I feel like that like takes me back to like 15 years ago. I don't know if you're still using that. I mean, I've heard people say there's security concerns with 7-zip, but like, I mean, it's free, it's open source. Um, it's not WinRAR, I guess. But yeah, it's kind of an interesting thing to look out for. I think we should just because WinRAR I feel like is still a very, very like prolific application somehow, even like after it's basically it used to be like one of the like I don't know, most popular applications a while ago or maybe 15 years ago. Um yeah, so if you do have this installed and if there's like a concern that you'll be a target of Russian cybercrime groups, then probably update the software. But yeah, not too much to say about this.
Yeah, unfortunately, I'm not like a big Windows user in general, so I'm not super familiar with any of these archiving tools. At the very least, with 7-zip, it is open source. Like you said, WinRAR never has been. It's just been trialware basically. So there's a lot of good reasons to switch. Definitely look into it. Um, Speaking of security updates, I'll just mention it really quick because I know a lot of people use this application too. But Plex recently emailed out to all of their users that they released a high severity security update. So if you're watching and you have a Plex server, um, you might want to make sure it's up to date as well. I'll just throw that out there. I don't think many details about that specific vulnerability have been shared. I don't think it's like in the wild like this one, but while we're on the subject, a little PSA for you all.
No, that's good. That's good. Yeah, I didn't get anything either, so um, maybe they're still sending it out, but definitely something to be aware of.
I think that kind of wraps up all of the news I've seen this week. Bit of a slow news week, which isn't always a bad thing. But what we can take a look at some of the forum posts. Have you seen any forum posts this week that have stood out to you?
I would say that there hasn't been like a huge amount of like discussion on the forum. There's always that continuing thread about the open source requirement for password managers. Um, but I think there was like a couple of questions and people putting comments on the thread that we posted. So we could take a look at that next if you want.
Um,
Unless
yeah,
there was any.
I haven't been able to catch up on that thread too much, so I might not have much to add. I think it's been going a bit in circles, and I haven't really seen any new information shared there, so I don't think there's much more to discuss from last time. I know another thread that I've seen pretty active on the forum is about Proton Lumo again. It's kind of related to how Proton markets all of their services because they're marketing it as open source, but currently none of that source code is available. Apparently, the response that one of our community members received from Proton was that the statement on their website reflects their long-term intention and the values that they stand for, but not necessarily the instantaneous state upon launch, which is a really interesting statement. I think Proton has this has been a big complaint about Proton for a while. They use open source a lot in their marketing, but they don't actually they're not developing their products out in the open like you would expect from true free and open source software companies. They're not using like Git, for example, in making those changes live. The approach that they often take is they work on things behind the scenes and then they kind of bundle it all up and publish that source code like every release or every so often all at once, which isn't the greatest situation because oftentimes we do see Proton source code releases fall behind the actual releases, which puts people in a situation where um, you don't know exactly what you're running on your computer right now, for example, because you might be using a beta or a release that hasn't been pushed on GitHub yet. Or like in this case, it's just not available on GitHub at all. I think, Proton Drive had this issue for a long time, and I think there might still be a few Proton apps besides Lumo that aren't published at all, which is very concerning. And I am not a fan of that whole situation at Proton whatsoever. Um, Although we talked about Lumo in a previous episode, and we were kind of like not the greatest program to use in the first place for a variety of reasons. We probably don't need to get on the AI train. So how much this one specifically matters, I don't know. But did you get to read that thread at all?
Yeah, I did see that one. I think like an important thing to like think about here is like I feel like saying that it is open source, like that isn't that like a verb? Like it's open like now. Like I don't know,
Yeah.
it seems I don't know. I think that depending on the country that you reside in, I feel like that could be considered as like false advertising. But I mean, I think there's a good we can draw a parallel to like a competitor of Proton here, which is Tutor. If you check their GitHub repo, it is actually it's actually the repo that their like developers actually work on. And there's, actual development and you can see all the threads of their developers working on things. And I think that is a much better way to do things than having this sort of strange like bundling and sort of randomly just publishing things. I'm not sure if I agree with that way of doing things. It's not really in the ethos of open source, I would say. It's sort of just like, I don't know, not really open source. It's like just sometimes releasing the source code, I guess. Um, but I know there's like technicalities like I know like with the GPL v3, the source code doesn't actually have to be available online. Like you can actually, as long as it's available on request, it's actually still applicable. So it's kind of strange, I guess. There's like quite different definitions about how and what that works. So um
Yeah, that's very true. The GPL, it doesn't require that because I think a lot of these open source licenses were like, we want the code to be accessible for people to learn from or potentially build their own thing off of it, but they aren't necessarily like intended for people to be able to audit the code in real time or for security reasons. Like I think a lot of people would expect from a company like Proton. Um, yeah, I completely disagree with how Proton handles all of the open source stuff. I don't think that it really reflects their values and what they stand for like they claim. Because if it did, they would be more on top of this and they would actually, publishing and working in the open, it isn't the hardest thing to do, and it doesn't mean you need to accept like party contributions either. Plenty of companies will develop things on GitHub and not accept pull requests or whatever because they want to keep it all internal, and that's totally fine. But actually publishing the thing that you're releasing at this is it's the correct approach here, and it's uh yeah, a big complaint I have about Proton in general.
yeah, I think it's like concerning that like they keep releasing products and not having them open source immediately. But I mean, we do have a decent like track record of them pulling through with this. Like if you just go on their GitHub, they've got the iOS mail client, the Android mail client, all of their open PGP JavaScript like repositories seem to be active. Like it's not like everything is. It's just it seems a lot of these like secondary applications like the drive or like the calendar or like Lumo in this case are not really being publicly developed. Um, Whereas it seems like at least I'm not a developer, so I don't know, but it seems like at least the web clients are being somewhat publicly developed. So just to be more specific about what we're talking about here. Still an interesting thread to check out if you're interested and you have been using this tool. It's definitely worth checking out.
Yeah. Another news thread I saw from the community was about some people who researched the privacy risks of Apple Intelligence. Let me see if I can pull up their blog. Yeah, this is from a company called Lumia. I'm not sure exactly what their platform is, but their article is called Apple Storm: Unmasking the Privacy Risks of Apple Intelligence. There was some good discussion on the forum, which is why I bring it up. If you like are an Apple Intelligence user and you want to know about it, the kind of like broad overview is that it isn't more private than Siri was. It does pretty much all the same things that Siri did, and Apple is maybe being a bit misleading about how they use private compute cloud because in reality, almost no features of Apple Intelligence right now do use that private compute that they talked about so much when they first introduced Apple Intelligence. Um, and some things still aren't processed entirely on your device. It's just sent to the normal cloud services that Apple has been using for Siri this whole time. So yeah, definitely, if you're an Apple user, not something that you can really trust with sensitive data right now. A lot of privacy concerns around all of this AI stuff, like I think we've been kind of hammering down in all of these episodes. It seems like any AI related tool, unless you completely run every single thing yourself using like open source programs and models completely locally, they simply are not private, and they are not going to be private for quite a long time. So if you're using anything in the cloud right now, it's just something that you need to keep in mind.
Yeah, I think, we're obviously going to recommend here disabling Apple Intelligence, not using this software if you have a device that supports it. Um, yeah, Siri has never been sort of super privacy respecting, but it's also like in a field where like every product is like really privacy invasive, like Google Assistant. I guess it's called Gemini now. Um, they've kind of working to integrate that into the Android operating system to like access your calls, your messages, your emails. Like it's pretty terrible. So I mean, at least Apple is trying to at least do something, even if it's not really that great. It's still better than like absolutely terrible. Just to be, I guess, the devil's advocate here. Um, but yeah, I would definitely not use this. And in a lot of cases that I've seen, um, when I've used this Apple Intelligence thing, a lot of times it will just defer the request to ChatGPT, which OpenAI does like not a trustworthy company when it comes to your privacy. I'm not entirely sure like when this like private cloud compute devices like this like sort of service is actually used to handle Siri requests, because a lot of times when I've tried it, it's just deferred the request to ChatGPT. So I'm not entirely sure where this is actually like what this is doing, because like I know they've introduced this new like visual intelligence thing that just gets sent to ChatGPT. Like it does ask you before it sends it, but like I'm not entirely sure where this like private cloud compute actually comes in, and whether it's just this marketing thing they're using to like make people a bit more comfortable with using it.
Yeah, definitely does kind of seem that way. As far as I know, it's just very limited circumstances that probably don't apply to even most or some queries that you do. I do think that like I hope they expand it in the future. It's an interesting concept, but it does still have a lot of the same problems that we had with Lumo, for example, where ultimately a lot of the stuff is still processed in an unencrypted manner, which presents some sort of wiretapping threat to people who are using this. So even when private cloud compute comes out, it will not be um perfectly safe or private. It will be like a step be above ChatGPT or something just running on normal server hardware, but it's definitely a middle ground solution and probably not the solution that people who are really concerned about their privacy or security are going to be wanting from these products. And we're just not there yet. I don't think any company is really there yet. I think we can move on to some questions I've seen on the forum for us. I think I've only seen one from community member Bean Taco, who asked, I'm curious what adverse effects YouTube age verification will have on alternative front ends like PeerTube or Invidious. Um, I think we're definitely going to see there's going to be an impact. It'll be similar to like what happened with Knitter and Twitter probably at first, where it became very challenging to kind of scrape any of that information. It really depends on what approach YouTube takes to all of this because they could end up blocking access to any YouTube anonymously without an account, which would kind of put a stop to a lot of these services. Um, so I don't think we know for sure what effect it'll have, but it will definitely have some effect.
I don't know, I'm hopeful that like we can see somewhat of a like positive outcome of this whole thing. Like I feel like people are kind of getting a bit sick of the restrictions that people keep putting that Google keeps putting on YouTube. Like um I know recently, or at least in like the last year or so, they keep requiring you to sign in to watch videos, and like now there's also the restriction on like certain videos are now going to be requiring age verification, or your entire account might get blocked because they think you're a child. So I think like these alternatives might become more interesting to people, and especially if they're like more of a federated system. The laws only apply to platforms with over 10,000 users, so maybe there's like an opportunity for a more federated platform to actually succeed. One can only hope. I think PeerTube works pretty well for like just watching videos, but like the discovery aspect is really missing. So I don't know how they could fix that, especially because I feel like that is one of the main issues with Federation is discovering new content. Um, that's at least my experience. But yeah.
Yeah, it's really hard to say what the future will hold. There's a lot of problems with platforms other than YouTube, I think, just because both video hosting and video production in general are very expensive forms of like creating content. And compared to like writing a blog post or an article, it just requires so much more work that uh, these creators correctly like want to be compensated for. And I don't think that model really exists outside of like super big names. I think there's a reason that like before YouTube came out, you could really only create this sort of video content if you had a huge production and team behind you and you were broadcasting on television or something like that. Whereas, um, like YouTube has enabled so many more people to create video content and kind of share information that way, and it's made it so much more accessible. But these changes might lead us away from that. And I think that if you're expecting like to learn things on YouTube, for example, it's possible that that will eventually go away and we'll kind of go back to more original forms of information sharing, like articles or the other ways that we shared information before YouTube came out, which wouldn't be good, I don't think, but it might just be the reality of what will happen on the internet if you want access to unbiased informational content instead of just clickbait and entertainment, which I think will be kind of the primary forms of content we'll see on video platforms in the future if these restrictions really take hold and prevent any sort of information sharing from happening on them. So it's not great.
Yeah, I think also like you said, like the monetary aspect is just so important to people. Like um having that like ad revenue coming in from YouTube, like a lot of creators are relying on that. But I think a lot of creators probably do rely on that like for their majority of their income. So like something like PeerTube is like not really as sustainable for people, unfortunately. I don't know how that could change in the future, if there's some sort of way to make that work, but it just feels like the way that things are monetized currently, it's kind of tricky to see a platform that's like completely um, funded by users without it being like powered by advertising, because it feels like the entire web is basically powered by advertising at this point, unfortunately.
Yeah, I mean, in a general sense, it's just a bummer that that has been the business model of the internet for anything more than like simple text blogs for quite a while. If you want to make a living, advertising is pretty much the only way for most people to do it until you get yourself to the point where maybe you can get a large subscriber base. But when you're just starting out, that isn't really viable, and it doesn't become viable for a very long time. There isn't like a period of like a year or 2 where you can kinda stick it out if you really wanna build a business and go from there. It takes like, some companies decades to get to this point where they have enough people who are willing to pay them enough to kind of fund their content, um, on a regular basis. I know many channels still are not even close to that point and rely like, even if they have a lot of subscribers, they still get a very substantial percentage of their earning from advertising in YouTube. So yeah, I don't know if we'll see an alternative in the future. I don't know what people are working on. I know there's a lot of ideas like Brave has with Bat, which I don't think has really gone anywhere. I haven't heard a lot about that stuff since like 2020 and the height of that cryptocurrency craze. Even though crypto is kind of coming back and people are talking about it again, I haven't heard a lot about Brave in that regard. So I don't think um, that's really caught on. I don't know if a system like that will work for people. Um, yeah, it's hard, and that's exactly why I think, you know, if it becomes harder and harder to make money on the internet, we're just gonna see most content coming out from people who are providing like an educational service, for example. It's just gonna be cheaper forms of content. Like, um, you know, worst case scenario, privacy guides and like all the people who are working on this, we're never gonna stop publishing content because it's already volunteer based and we're just putting it out there. But um, there are like most of what we do besides the work that Jordan's been doing on this channel, it is very low cost and we can sustain it with volunteers. It's this higher level video content that's very challenging to sustain with just a volunteer crew, and that stuff I think is going to go away.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people don't like realize the extent of time and effort that goes into like, you know, just a single video production. That can be tens or even 100 hours of like time spent on like a single video. Like it's very time consuming to produce like, you know, high quality stuff. And I know there's channels on YouTube that have got like entire teams of people. Like there's huge productions now. It's like almost, you could say it's actually bigger than some like news outlets or like broadcasting companies. Like it's become kind of huge, and I don't see how they would really be able to sustain the same thing without like, you know, either like advertising or like uh losing their independence through taking sponsorships or whatever, which, you know, we will never do. So it's tricky.
Yeah, yeah, it's not great. Seems like a lot of bad news this week, but you know, that's just kind of what's what's going on with the laws these days. I think that kind of wraps up all the questions I've seen. Is there anything else you wanted to cover on this episode before we wrap things up?
No, I think it might be a good idea though. Just let us know what you think, but I think it might be a good idea. Maybe we throw in one positive story every week just to keep things a little bit more, um, you know, not as down and out. But yeah, I didn't really have anything else to add apart from look out for after this stream because there'll be that video dropping about age verification. So definitely look out for that.
All right. Yeah, definitely keep an eye on that. Thank you all for joining us for this episode of This Week in Privacy. We share all these updates on our forum and stuff, so you can follow us there. You can follow us on YouTube if you want to follow these videos. Um, if you like the work that we do and you want to support what we're working on, definitely consider becoming a member of Privacy Guides. We have on our website, if you click the little red heart icon in the top right corner, you can send a donation or become a member, and it really does support the work that we do behind the scenes, not just Jordan and I, but um, our other team members who are writing articles every day and all of the other projects that we're working on with our community behind the scenes. It definitely could use your support, so please consider that. We will be back again next week on this channel with another live stream like usual, and we will see you all then.
Thanks
See you,
so much for
everyone.
watching, everybody. See ya.